To our favorite shows!
Oh, my circuits!
Everybody loves Hypnotoad!
Scary Dog!
Pearson and Blazeball! Futurama!
Good evening. You are listening to a Radulich Broadcasting Premier Podcast TV Party tonight. I'm your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, unmodified Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight, our favorite show is Jupiter's Legacy, an American superhero drama television series which premiered on Netflix on May 7th, based on the Image comic book Jupiter's Legacy by Mark Millar and Frank Quitely, which we talked about on Monday, myself and Chris Sheehan. It was developed for television by Stephen S. DeKnight, who initially served as showrunner. Midway through production, though, he was replaced by Sang-Kyu Kim. The show stars Josh Duhamel, Ben Daniels, Leslie Bibb, Elena Kampouris, Andrew Horton, Mike Wade, and Matt Lanter. And it was brought to you by the good people at D. Bonaventure Pictures, DeKnight Productions, and Miller World Productions, and, of course, Netflix. And speaking of Netflix, here's your co-host for the evening, the coverage god of 411 Mania, and the host of Damn You Hollywood, your favorite movie review show. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Winfree. How do you do, sir?
I'm tired, Mark. I am worn down. I'm slightly beaten up. But I'm here to talk about superheroes going through a lot of those same things, so I'm at least in a decent place to discuss them.
Terrific. You've never... Now, I initially had you tagged for the book as a favor to me.
That's true.
You know, the occasional favor that I ask of you, because I try not to ask too much of you.
You know, just once in a while. A thing, you know, a whole podcast, a whole series of podcasts.
Here's a list of my demands.
Pretty much. I am the unwashed masses. Mark is the not even the benevolent dictator. He's like the violent dictator, lording over all those who have been sucked into the orbit of the Radulich Broadcasting Network, twirling his mustache.
I merely give choice. I mean, granted, you guys aren't wrong when I say if you choose to not do these things, then I just won't deal with you at all. But it is still a choice. It is your choice to make.
Yeah. So if anyone out there wants to pay me for this, I'm willing to abandon this entire endeavor. I'm just throwing it out there.
But I did ask you to... I ended up asking Chris Sheehan to do the book, as he does not hate Mark Millar with a white-hot passion, like he does some comic book writers. So you've never read the book, correct?
Correct. When I was going to be reviewing it with you, I looked it up to just see, hey, some plot synopses, what am I getting into? I don't really like going in blind to comics. It's kind of a recipe for disaster for me. I need to at least understand the baseline expectations I should have.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I judge it unfairly, which I've done in the past. Or, it's also what allows me to have a different perspective on different things. So again, so long as I know kind of what I'm in for.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's certain properties that I've been on tap to review that I've read part of, and then you've kind of gone, don't worry about it. And then I listened to the review, and you had a vastly different experience with it than I did.
Okay, so you didn't really know too much about Jupiter's Legacy before I pitched it, and Netflix announced they were doing the series.
It was a thing you put in the channel, you put in the group chat and said, somebody's doing this with me, and I was the last one to put my finger on my nose.
Yeah, everyone else took a step backwards. So let's talk about Stephen DeKnight for a second. Stephen DeKnight directed and wrote Pacific Rim Uprising, which you and I trashed.
Oh,
so we're not off to a good start here. He wrote for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which Sean Comer can't stop gushing about. He directed, wrote, and produced for Angel, which he gushes a little less about, but still gushes.
Angel is better than Buffy, and if you disagree with me, y'all know where you can find me, and we can fight that out.
Speaking of fighting that out, he wrote and directed Smallville. He wrote and directed and consulted on Dollhouse, at least for one episode called The Target.
He's one of Joss Whedon's little toadies, right?
But this gets better. Hang on, let me get there. He was the writer and executive producer and creator of Spartacus, which ran from 2010 to 2013 on Starz. And then here's
To
something
be fair to Spartacus, a couple of the seasons are pretty good. Like it's uneven, horribly uneven, which is kind of a trend in DeKnight's work more generally, but it's not all bad.
Well, guess what, Binky? He was the showrunner for Daredevil in 2015.
Once again, stuff that was horribly uneven.
He,
much as I love giant segments of Daredevil, there's we can't pretend that it's not horribly uneven in parts.
No, but I mean, we had plenty of good things to say about Daredevil.
Oh, yeah.
So,
100%.
and that was his last project before Jupiter's Legacy.
If nothing else, that man was at least partially responsible for Vincent D'Onofrio's Wilson Fisk, so we all owe him a debt.
So he jumps into this project with both feet. He gets replaced midway through by Sang Q Kim, who I can't tell you anything about because he does not have a wiki link. Here is the synopsis for the show, and then I'm going to pitch it over to you to start guiding the conversation, and you and I will just bat the tennis ball back and forth. Shortly after his father's suicide in 1929, triggered by Black Tuesday, former businessman Sheldon Sampson travels to an uncharted island in the Atlantic Ocean where he, his brother Walter, and 4 others receive superpowers. He then creates a superhero team called the Union of Justice, and his guiding ideals, never kill anyone, never interfere in political matters, remain unchanged over the near century of his adventures as the Utopian. However, the next generation of superheroes, including his children, struggles to live up to his rigid ideals and high expectations. When Sheldon's son Brandon seemingly kills one of their greatest foes, it ignites a public debate over whether those ideals are still relevant. I'm just going to say this, and then I'm going to pitch, and then I'll pitch it over to you. The book mainly dealt with Walter feeling like we have these powers, we should use them to guide humanity, not just save humanity from itself. We should have a more direct influence on politics, and I should have a more direct influence on policy because I'm the smartest guy in the room. And Utopians like, yeah, that is exactly what we don't want because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if people don't agree with the way we're doing things or what we're doing isn't right, who could possibly stop us? I'm Superman and you're Brainiac. Which results in Walter seducing his son into killing him and having an uprising among the younger generation of superheroes. There's a daughter who's sort of a ne'er-do-well and a Kardashian, and she's not really taking to this. She has the superpowers, but does not want to be a superhero. She prefers to be a party girl and a model and all of that. And when her brother turns on her father and kills him, and Walter ascends to leadership in the United States government, she and the father of her yet unborn child go into hiding. Now, this character is actually the son of a famous supervillain. The Joker to the Lex Luthor to Utopian Superman. And so she's not supposed to be with him, obviously, but they are, and he's fathered a child with her.
It's also torrid.
It's also very soapy. And so they go into hiding, and that's pretty much half the book, is Walter looking for them 8 years later still, and them trying to live like the Incredibles in hiding, not using their powers, and, the book ends with them being found, but then deciding, you know what, it's time to take the fight to Walter and Brandon and not be in hiding anymore because, we can't be. The show draws from the debate between Walter and Sheldon, the Utopian, as to what role they should play in the greater sphere of influence regarding the United States and the world. And the characters are mostly, Brandon struggling to live up to his father's ideals. That's constant. Chloe is a party girl and a ne'er-do-well and not wanting to be a superhero. That all tracks. And then the rest of the show just takes a left turn at Albuquerque, well away from the book, to where some people were commenting and on the site that I read the comic book at, like, wow, this is Jupiter's Legacy in name only. So I will then pitch it to you to talk about the first 4 episodes, and then we'll kick that around.
Well, the show draws from more what you read for the review on source material, which is in the archives, and you're all listening to this. If you're interested, can listen to that particular discussion. It draws from more than just the first volume. It also draws from the spin-off, which is the origin story for the original Union of Justice.
Yeah, Jupiter's Circle.
Yeah, and I also... This is going to be a little bit of a different discussion that we can have later. I think it was the right call for this show to make those changes.
Okay.
This show, not just this show, but the comic Jupiter's Legacy, based on, again, I have not read it in full, but based on my listening to you guys kick it around and my synopsis reading and listening to some other people discuss it, it's a little bit too much Watchmen.
Yeah, that came up. I didn't bring up the Watchmen specifically. I think Chris did, but I was thinking more of the Boys, where
This is a lot less The Boys for me. For a couple of specific reasons.
It's not nearly as cynical as the Boys. This was more philosophical.
The Boys is a lot more cynical and a lot more Garth Ennis. It is more Garth Ennis.
Yeah, the Boys is very Garth Ennis.
Yeah. But the television show takes a deliberate change away from a lot of the Watchmen dynamic, which is incredibly welcome. If you're not going to do anything different than Watchmen, but you're going to try and tell essentially the same story, don't. Just don't. We don't need another iteration of that.
Okay, so for people who don't quite understand what you're talking about, I mean, I'm with you. I really am. But when you say if you can't do what Watchmen was doing better than Watchmen, don't do Watchmen, what was Watchmen doing?
For those unaware, the original Watchmen graphic novel by Alan Moore, written by Alan Moore, I forget the artist, so forgive me.
And might I add at this time, fuck Firestorm. Go ahead.
Sure. That is a deconstruction of the Gold and Silver Age superhero genre. And it's important to understand it as a deconstruction of that particular time period of superhero comics. Because it is very clearly not a deconstruction of, anything late 80s, because it didn't come out, because that's after it came out, or any of the 90s excesses, about which the less said the better. Pockets. So many pockets. So it is very much a specific era, and everyone loves Watchmen for good reason. It's incredibly well written. It is, in many respects, still the gold standard for deconstructionism, at least of the comic book genre. And, again, who doesn't love it? It is a monumental, monolithic work that shadow is felt still over the industries that are adjacent to it. The problem is that everyone seems to want to do Watchmen, but most of them can't really... You have to do something different with it. You can't just do Watchmen all over again, because it's already been done. With The Boys, it gets deeply... Watchmen as a story is not cynical. The Boys is very cynical.
Mm-hmm.
The Boys is also hyper-violent and hypersexual.
Yeah, the discussion that Chris and I had on Monday, if people want to check that out, was basically, superheroes are modern myth. They are modern mythology. They are what we go to. They serve the same purpose as the ancient myths of yore, the Roman gods, the Greek gods, etc., etc. Your polytheistic constructions of deism. That's what comic books serve for modern audiences in many ways. We look to them for fantasy. We look to them for escapism. And in many cases, we look for them for some degree of moral compassing, to draw it back to the gods and whatnot. And there are certain comic writers that look at the comic book medium and go, okay, but what if this were real life? How would these people react? And so they want to completely deconstruct the comic book medium from its fantasy elements and present it as if, what if Superman were real? How would he act? And here's the thing. I think as exercises in philosophy and editorializing and moralizing, I think these are some good ideas, and I think there have been some great stories that have come out of it. Certainly some interesting ideas, if not great. but you have to be careful with it, and not every time this is done is a humdinger. This is not an idea that bats 1,000. There are some...
Not even close.
There are some big misses where I think, it's kind of like Zack Snyder's take on superheroes, where you have a very shallow point of view and understanding of this medium.
So, the point being, when the show kind of started adapting the material, they made it about something different than Watchmen. Again, Watchmen is just, how does power corrupt? How would the world really react to Superman? He couldn't be Clark Kent, that kind of thing. This one takes it to a slightly different degree and takes it to the show's credit. I think it handles some discussions that are contemporary in a very mature fashion.
There's a central debate that goes on, which is, are the mores of yesterday, the ones that we live by that worked well for us for decades, still relevant in an age that has seemed to have moved on to people that don't treasure them the way we did? I mean, essentially, to really break it down to brass tacks, you have half of the cast saying, it's 2021, for God's sakes, the world has changed, it's become a much different place. The ideals that held up for decades no longer apply. That is a very relevant discussion in 2021.
It is, and to the credit of the show, it's very easy to make Josh Duhamel's character, the Utopian, to make him, because we've seen, again, like, that centralized discussion is not new, but it's very easy for most, when I say easy, I mean this is bad writing, but it's easy, but it's an easy thing to do, to make one of those points of view clearly wrong. Now, whether that's in presentation or in messenger or whatever it happens to be, it is very easy to portray the people looking for progress to be stupidly charging ahead and ignoring all the wisdom that has come before them. And it's equally easy to portray everyone arguing for caution as a head in the sand, stick in the mud character. And you and I have talked about stories that do that, and it's deeply annoying because more often than not, it comes across. It feels like the author, not the character. It feels like the author agrees with one of these two perspectives more than the other, so they deliberately have characters on the opposite side of their point of view be wrong or stupid.
Right.
This show goes out of its way to present both sides as having merit. It does not give you an answer. It doesn't actually take much of a point of view on, again, what is the solution? Which I find refreshing, especially in most contemporary fictional media, which is more about sermonizing than anything else.
Yeah.
So this show intertwines two different stories. We have the story that takes place in 1929 in the past, and the story in the present. So throughout the first 4 episodes, what we get is kind of the following. In the past, the characters of Sheldon and Walter Sampson take over their father's steel. Again, we have the crash of 1929. Their father commits suicide. Turns out he was skimming from the steel mill's pension fund to try and foster some expansion. Walter had warned them all not to expand because bubbles burst. And no one listened to him, so he feels a little bit embittered about this. They meet a few other characters, some of whom will become superheroes. First and foremost would be Grace, played by Leslie Bibb. She's a reporter who wrote an expose on their father and his malfeasance. But the big thing that we get here is Sheldon has some kind of seizure episode and starts receiving visions. And then he starts hallucinating, seeing his father talking to him, and he gets, again, these visions and these coordinates, and he abandons his life to wander the American Midwest. Eventually finds his way to Kansas, where he finds what he's been looking for. There is, in fact, another point to this that I want to talk about a little bit later when we get more detailed, but just kind of bear with me. Where he finds he finds Red Foreman.
And Red Foreman calls him a dumbass.
Like you do. Who has also been having these kind of visions, gives him some directions, and then commits suicide. Sheldon kind of at this point gets a fair bit of his act back together. He goes back to his fiancée, he goes back to his family, but to his brother, to his best friend. But he's now convinced that he needs to go to this point in the middle of the Atlantic, and he has specific people that he needs to go with him. So he gathers together the last scraps of the money that he and his friends can pool, charters this expedition into the middle of the Atlantic, where they find an island. They overcome adversity. They overcome personal hurdles. Again, I'm being very broad here. Well, sorry, we're only going over the first 4 episodes. First 4 episodes end. First 4 episodes end after he finds Red Foreman and decides to go back to his life. In the present, we see Sheldon and Chloe's children, the aforementioned Brandon and Chloe. Chloe being a vapid, vacuous, self-absorbed, self-destructive party girl. If you've seen one of them, you've seen them all. Brandon being the troubled, trying to live up to his father's legacy. Boy, how am I ever going to get out from under this shadow? Superhero. Once again, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. The difference comes at the end of the first episode. There's a fight with an uber villain named, was it Blackstar? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where Blackstar kills some of Brandon's friends and is about to go nuclear and kill not only the remainder of Brandon's friends from his kind of team that he'd been assembling, but his mother, his father, and like his uncle, and Brandon deciding in this moment that this will not fly, punches him very, very hard in the face and kills him. The never killing being a primary point of the code of ethics that the Union of Justice has laid down. The rest of the first 4 episodes deal a lot with that. Again, Chloe descends deep into depravity, runs into the powerless son of one of the original founders of the Union, a superhero named Skyfox, who in the past is Sheldon's best friend, Charlie. Was it Charlie? I'm pretty sure that was the character's name.
Georgie, that was it. That's right, it was the suffix that kind of threw me off.
Anyway, who is a thief who's got something that his father built for him that lets him teleport, or anyone who's holding it, and he gets up to bits of mischief with this. He's a thief and a low-level criminal, and is trying to build something for quasi-nefarious purposes. We're never quite sure, and we don't actually get an answer to what he's building before this season ends, so it's still a little bit up in the air. The first 4 episodes conclude with this on this particular group, with Chloe, again, descending deep into depravity, Brandon struggling with his identity, Sheldon, the Utopian, struggling with the fact that his son killed someone, which he takes very, very seriously, and most people seem to think his son did the right thing, and the escalating violence from all of the other supervillains who went, wait, you're not supposed to kill us, how dare you? Only we can kill. They're Conan O'Brien. Only I may dance. So that's our first 4 episodes. What kind of sticks? I've got to say this, just straight up. I found the stuff in the past, that kind of swashbuckling, quasi-horror, sanity-bending adventure, I found that much more interesting than everything going on in the present.
I'm 50-50 on that. And I think because in the comic, it's not that big a part of the book. You know, it kind of opens with, here's how they got their powers. And then it flashes forward into the present where Brandon is struggling with being a superhero. So I was like, oh gosh, they're spending an awful lot of time on something. And I guess because they get more into this in Jupiter's Circle. So, you know, it's just I haven't read it, and it wasn't in the book that I read, but maybe it's covered elsewhere, and so that's what they're drawing from. Either way, I was like, if the central narrative of this story is the debate between and the breakdown of the relationship between Walter and Sheldon. It's the back half of the season, the last 4 episodes, where you really see that relationship, in the foundation of it, so that when it cracks later on, it becomes more effective. So a lot of the stuff in the past, I kind of saw the usefulness of it in achieving the objective of establishing a relationship between Walter and Sheldon, so that you can break it later and it becomes more effective. The problem is, they waited until the very last episode of, this doesn't feel like a whole season of television. This feels like a mid-season finale.
I'd agree with that.
And that might have been the intention, is Netflix may look at their analytics and go, people like shorter series of television. I mean, they did this with like Fuller House rather. They've done this with a couple of different series where we have a full season of television here, a full 16 to 20 episodes, but we're just going to release half of it now. Lucifer, which they picked up on and continued. The first time they did it, they just did 10 episodes, and then the second season that they did, season 5, they cut in half, and that is actually coming out very shortly, the second half of it.
Yeah, they did that with The Ranch, Disenchantment, the aforementioned Fuller House. So it's a thing they do sometimes. So either way, I'm fine with it. I'm with you in that this didn't really feel like a big season finale, but I'm kind of okay with it either way.
So the stuff in the past, on the one hand, I was a little impatient. I was like, can we please get to the meat of the matter? And if I had known they were going to end the show where they did, I might have my patience might have held a little bit more. On the other hand, they're the two best characters in this. They're the two most interesting. I mean, so much of this
by a mile.
So much of this is focused on Josh Duhamel, and he's great, and and he really carries the series on his back. No pun intended, given he's the Superman character. But him agonizing over being a parent, being a paragon of virtue, being a symbol, dealing with relationships that are fracturing, dealing with friends who are dying, dealing with friends who have been paralyzed in some way. Dealing with friends who have turned on him, and just going I have all of the, it's very much a Superman analog in that I have all of this power, but I can't save the things that are important to me. I'm losing my children. My wife is mad at me. My brother is turning on me. I've already had to imprison my best friend in the Phantom Zone somewhere. All of these things are going on in this character's life, and he's still clinging to ideals that he feels are important to him in the world and what they're doing, and the world is now turning on him too. That scene where they're coming out, I forget where, but
they're doing the press conference, right?
Yeah, and people are protesting the idea of not killing criminals. You absolutely should, and he's like, "What the fuck, man?" I'm a good dude with all of this power, and nothing is going my way. It is a Faustian bargain and a curse if I've ever seen one. And it is really the table on which this entire series rests. So he's great. And so you ask, to a very long-winded answer, what did I think about the stuff in the past? Knowing what I know now, I think it's an important part of the foundation of this series, and I thought it was actually pretty well done, if not a little slow. I think that's my only criticism, is I was starting to kind of zone out when he was wandering about the Midwest, and then when they got to Skull Island, which is what I'm going to be calling it from now on, when they got to Skull Island, again, it's a little draggy, but it's important. It becomes less draggy when you start focusing in on the relationships between the characters and less on the action in those scenes.
Oh, my favorite part on the island is actually when they're all kind of crossing the desert, and this is after Josh. We'll get to this more later when we talk about the next. So let me save that actually for the appropriate time. So the stuff in the present, I don't dislike the character of Hutch.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish he was something more than the the lovable troublemaker.
I wish they had just done the comic book when it came to him and Chloe. they have them in a relationship, but that gets established a little bit later on. But I wish more of her story in this season was less I'm mad at my dad and I'm acting out, and more I'm in love with the son of his enemy, and we're going to have a baby. I wish like that had been more of the focus, because Chloe in the book is a relatable character. Chloe in the show, not so much. Chloe in the show is a fucking asshole.
She really is just a giant waste of space.
Yeah, like I guess in the narrative, you're supposed to feel for both kids in that they are a byproduct of his misparenting, his misguided parenting. Like, he's not abusive. He holds them to such a high standard that one is struggling with trying to live up to it and making mistakes along the way, and the other one rejects it entirely. And you're supposed to feel for them, except that she's such a lunatic and an asshole that I don't feel anything for her. I powers are wasted on you.
So was screen time.
Yeah, I did not enjoy her scenes.
Look, I've said this. If you've seen one strung-out, self-destructive, drug-addicted model in Los Angeles story, you've seen them all, man.
I mean, you really have to work hard at telling a story that's interesting with those kinds of characters.
And there is nothing interesting about Chloe.
No. And that's the thing, is like, Hutch could have been interesting too. He's certainly a little bit more interesting in the comic book, especially when you flash forward 8 years and he's got a son and you see their relationship. Here, he's just a jackass thief who kind of says funny things with his wand. They do the bit with shark-infested waters in the book too, which I laughed at.
Yeah, that's not a bad bit. I liked that bit just because it subverted your expectations for that sequence beautifully. And it gave you just this bit of, oh, you could be a serious, like, you choose to be the way that you are, right? Like, you could be a much bigger threat. And for whatever reason, you're choosing to be a clown. And that the obvious question there becoming, why are you choosing this? And again, we don't quite get an answer, but I am interested to see where that particular story goes. So again, we have Walter, who's advocating for a bigger role in the world, and he presents. There's a great scene between him and the Utopian, I think, in these first 4 episodes, where he says, he says to me, we've got to do more in the world. You think about World War II, man. We could have ended that very, very quickly. And how many people could we have saved? And Dumel's response, which is, it's clear that he's taking this seriously because he also feels the weight of the stuff that happened in World War II. He goes, okay, but then what about Korea? What about Vietnam? What about the Cold War? Would there be a Cold War? What would if we allow our existence to warp the entire geopolitical landscape, and there's no check on us, then what are we?
That is a constant theme in the Superman comics about Superman's non-involvement in global activity. It comes up in the movies too, here and there, where I cannot fight the battles for them. Humanity has to evolve on its own. I can deal with very acute threats, things that otherwise humanity would not be equipped to deal with. But in terms of sort of global issues like world wars and the Cold War and whatnot, it's best not to be involved because humanity has to work that out for themselves. And that's part of the central debate between Walter and Sheldon.
Yeah. Which is a very good debate. And it's also given a great character moment. Again, related to Walter turning on him later. He doesn't realize it, but relating to what Walter does. Walter, I think, lives in constant regret that he could not convince either Sheldon or his father that prior to the stock crash, prior to the Great Depression, maybe we shouldn't reinvest in ourselves at this point, leverage what we have and try to expand.
Well, that's kind of Sheldon's whole thing. And again, this came up a lot in the book too, is he's so smart, but nobody will listen to him. I don't know if you relate to that at all, Robert. I mean, just being so much smarter than everybody else, but nobody will listen. I mean, it's got to be frustrating. I mean, I don't know if you relate to that or not.
On occasion.
Brain the size of a planet, and they use me as a calculator. So, like, I got where Walter was coming from, both in the book and on the show, where you just feel like I could do so much more. I'm so much better than this. I'm so much better than all of you, and yet, and just in the situation with him, like that resentment of Sheldon. You're always dad's first choice, and you want for nothing. Meanwhile, I'm clearly the more talented of the two of us, and yet Dad doesn't see the value in me, and how much that breaks his heart and hurts his feelings.
And the reverse being true, when they have that discussion on the island, Sheldon brings up the counterpoint to that, which is okay. Maybe that's true, but look at how much more he trusted you. Like, you were the one who got to do things with him. You're the one that he didn't put on a facade for. You're the one that he trusted with, the dirtier side of business. You're the one that looked through the books. You're the one that he trusted. and that particular dichotomy. And again, there's that great moment on the island when Walter finally does kind of say what's really on his mind about this, when he just kind of yells at Sheldon, and if you'd listened to me, Dad would still be alive.
Yeah, which is rough to hear.
It really is. And it's rough. Kudos to everyone involved for that, because it is so well acted. Mm-hmm. Anything else in the first 4 episodes that we kind of want to kick around before moving on to the back half?
Only that Paragon, his son, is, I think, a much more interesting character in the book than he is in the show. In the show, he's kind of a wet mop. He has the one moment where he kills the Black Star clone, but the rest of it, he's just sort of moping around, going, "I wish Dad would love me more. I wish Dad would approve of me."
For the first 4 episodes, yeah, I can't. The one part in the first 4 episodes where I think he does something interesting is when he's present for the autopsy of Black Star.
Yeah, that's in the back half.
Okay, so the first 4, yeah, he's just kind of there.
Yeah, and that's my problem. Like I said, when the show, and I said this before, but it bears repeating, the show is kind of 50-50 for me, because when it's dealing with Josh, and when it's dealing with Sheldon and Walter, or Sheldon and his wife, Lady Liberty, Grace Kennedy, as played by Leslie Bibb, the lovely Leslie Bibb, I actually think the show works really, really well. And I think, in terms of a kind of Watchmen-esque deconstruction of the superhero genre, in the morals and ethics therein, and what do you do with all of this power, I think it's a fairly interesting and colorful thought experiment captured in 8 episodes on a streaming platform. When it deals with the kids, I'm utterly bored by this, and it misses the target entirely.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So as we get into the back half of this, in the past, Sheldon acquires the people who will become heroes with him. They go on a journey. There's some really fun stuff on this trip, man. It's there's a bit we've seen Sheldon's deteriorating psyche from his point of view. There's a few bits on the boat where we see it from others' point of view,
mm-hmm.
and which is a really nice way to kind of flip that on its head a little bit.
Can I had kind of one thought about all of that, and that is, it's the 1930s, and mental illness is kind of, they take you away.
Wildly misunderstood?
Mildly, sure.
I said, no, I said wildly.
Oh, wild, yeah. Yeah, mental illness is kind of, you are and you have to live in a place somewhere and you never see fresh air again, or you're not. And he is having full-on hallucinations, and he looks like he's having a mental breakdown. There's no fucking way anyone lets him on a boat to go to Skull Island. He gets taken away. I mean, I know if they do that, then there's no show. But I think they overwrote that part of it.
The only thing that saves him for the most part is, I think there's a couple of things. One is the reputation of his family and the associated prestige.
Yeah, you can make an argument for, okay, but he's also rich, so he gets away with being eccentric.
Yeah, like that's a big part of it. And the other part of it, again, we're talking about right after, we're talking about the beginning and the early stages of the Great Depression. And nobody got time for that. Oh, look, there's a crazy rich white guy. Huh. Do we care about this enough to assign resources to it?
Well,
no,
that's the thing.
let him smear feces on his bedroom window all he wants.
Well, I mean, I think his family would have had him taken away. I don't know if they would have.
That's actually one of the things I did enjoy. They got close a couple of times.
That's what I'm saying. They had to only get close in order for there to be dramatic tension. But in real life, granted, in real life, so what? But in real life, they would have never indulged him this much, and they'd have taken him away. If for no other reason, then they can't have this nut running around embarrassing the family.
Yeah, well, again, in real life, people who think that they're superheroes jump off buildings and die horribly. That's just kind of the way that goes.
Fair enough.
So in the past, they go to the island. They can have visions. They have obstacles. They have personal discussions. They all arrive at a point when, in order to survive, they have to put aside elements of their interpersonal drama, come together. They are transported to one of the moons of Jupiter. They are given the powers they're given the powers and costumes. They come back. They start setting up the first they start establishing the Justice League, the Union, and that's kind of where we leave that. In the present, Sheldon, the Utopian, is having some problems. He has some therapy sessions with the supervillain because really, who else could understand him? Which are kind of great, actually. He's got a great line when he says, he says something to the effect of, "What's the point of not?" There's two differing elements of the same point. One, I think the one he states outright is, "What's the point of doing the right thing if everyone thinks it's wrong?" And the kind of unasked question that they kind of discuss a little bit is, what's the point of the right thing existing if no one does it? And which is, again, a deeply philosophical question. So he does that. There's a bit where, again, the escalating violence from this other supervillains plays a big role. There are more superheroes dying. Grace, in particular, winds up one of Chloe's friends, who's been kind of sticking up for the code and for, we're supposed to be symbols. I'm not saying we have to be unfeeling paragons, but could you stop putting everything under the sun up your nose? She is killed. Grace very nearly kills the supervillain that kills her, but doesn't, and she winds up struggling with this. Brandon starts kind of coming around. Again, he attends the autopsy of Black Star, this clone of Black Star. They think this was a clone sent by George's character, Skyfox, who was one of the original Union members and betrayed them, and became a supervillain who is now on the run. Chloe and Hutch develop their relationship. It is CW worthy. The big kind of points here are Walter and his estranged daughter kind of getting stuck in the reconstructed brain of this clone, trying to figure out where he came from and finding a psychic representation of Skyfox. They fight it, they're able to overcome it, and Walter now sells Skyfox as this great big looming threat. Around the same time, Black Star breaks out of prison with the surreptitious help of Walter, who is setting everything up. Puts Utopian in a position where you either have to kill me or I'm going to kill your son. And it's a really great moment, actually, because you see the struggle from the Utopian, and then when he realizes that when he can't think of a way out of this, he actually does fire up his eye lasers and like, all right, fine. Like, there is that moment, and then somebody comes from behind and kind of settles the whole thing for them. They're able to restrain him, get him back in his cell. But Brandon and his father's relationship now takes a slightly different turn. It's a little bit ambiguous whether or not Brandon saw that his father was in fact going to kill this guy to save him. But so,
yeah,
again,
in the book, it's much more. Especially with the first episode, I thought we were going to get a lot more of Walter seducing Brandon to turn to the dark side, and then it's like summarily forgotten for many episodes, and then at the end, he's kind of there for it, but it's not as nearly as direct or as sneaky as it is in the book, and so
Look, the problem is that Walter never sits Brandon down and tells him the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise.
I know you're being sarcastic, but I mean, for you to the second half of this is going to be getting Walter to turn. Assuming they go with what they're going to do in the book, spoilers. Brandon's got to kill his father, and Walter has to sort of seduce him into doing so.
I actually wonder if they're not going to flip that.
Wait,
like the way this ends, with Walter Walter kills his estranged daughter because she realized that he was lying to everyone, and it kind of set them up because they're both psychics. And again, he's the one who's been manipulating everything. He created the clone. It was me. Don't you understand? I'm the author of all your pain, brother. But he's the one who's kind of there for Sheldon at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I do kind of wonder if they're not maybe going to flip that. We'll have to wait for more episodes to see if they do. But again, just kind of as a thought, because they put more effort into the relationship between Sheldon and Walter than Walter and Brandon.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if they're going the way that it goes in the comic, where he seduces Brandon, they haven't done enough of that to really set it up. They missed a lot of opportunities there. Like this very much, and that's the thing. You may be absolutely right, because this very much felt like Sheldon and Walter's story as opposed to a story about Brandon and Chloe, which is what the book is more about. So I'll be curious to see what they do next. And let me say this first before we go any further, because if we don't, we're never going to do it, and the show will be over, and then I'll have missed yet another opportunity. So one of the ways they could have made some improvements on writing this show and maybe gotten the critics to like it more would be to use Grammarly. Grammarly is
Grammarly would help the critics, Mark.
No, Grammarly. Look, if you're writing bad dialogue, if you're writing a bad scene, if you're writing underdeveloped characters, Grammarly, like a little guy comes up and he was like, "Stop that! Flesh this out a little bit more. What are you doing here? These are very flat characters." That's how Grammarly works in my mind.
If it does, that would be, in fact, quite awesome.
Grammarly will push you into the pool and just write for you. Here, stupid, let me take this over. Grammarly's AI-powered products help people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and nearly everywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork. Again, that's getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork to download Grammarly for free.
Again, jokes about it potentially helping your creative writing and plotting, character development aside, it is a wonderful product.
Indeed. All right, let's keep going.
So, I think what I find most interesting about, again, I said this before, I like the swashbuckling adventure, quasi-Lovecraftian stuff that we get out of the flashbacks. That's right up my alley, taste-wise. There's actually a somewhat interesting discussion that kind of comes out of the escalating violence in that, and I don't think this was intentional, for it to be looked at this way, but this almost kind of becomes a little bit of a commentary on modern policing.
Go on.
The criminal element gets more and more violent. It escalates, right? It always escalates.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are not criminals and have to live with this crap kind of start getting it up to here. My hand is very high above my head as I say that. With all of this stuff, and why can't the system fix this? The system is supposed to help us with this kind of stuff. So why isn't it working? What's wrong? How do we fix it? Maybe it would be better if we just shot all these people in the head in the street and left them to be feasted on by crows. And that's not really a morally justifiable position 90% of the time. But it's an understandable reaction.
Yeah, there's a larger debate about like death penalties and stuff like that, and like there is a reason why in many religions, a tenet of the religion is don't murder, don't kill people. It's the kind of thing that once you start to justify it in one way, it becomes very easy to justify it in other ways, and before you know it, you have a totalitarian regime murdering people in the streets.
Yeah, and the flip side of that being the superheroes who are dying, but are still restricted by this, this code of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
The we have to be better.
Yeah, this is an argument you actually hear from police where, it isn't really, we are, or you hear it from like American soldiers. It's another place where I've heard this argument where it's like, we have a code of combat. We have rules of engagement. That's the phrase. We have rules of engagement. If X happens, we respond with Y. Same thing with police. If X happens, we respond with Y, and that is all we are allowed to respond with. Outside of that, we are subject to the same laws as the people we are policing. And they go, meanwhile, the people that we're fighting are subject to nothing, no way, no how, and often take advantage of it, putting us in harm's way. And so the argument becomes, why can't we have more latitude in dealing with situations where keeping to the rules of engagement currently established would not apply and would actually put us in danger? And then the question becomes, okay, but then where do you draw the line, and who is deciding when to go beyond the rules of engagement and when not to? And this becomes very sticky, and this is why it's not an easy debate to settle.
Well, and again, it's one of the things that I appreciate about this show. It doesn't present one option it doesn't present an answer.
Yeah.
It presents...
It asks the questions, which is what a show should do.
Yeah.
Good fiction presents an argument, it presents both sides of the argument, and then lets the viewer kind of decide where, who is in the right. There isn't a clear villain and a clear hero representing either side. It's an opportunity for the audience to think about it and go, I wonder what I would do in that situation. See, that's pretty good writing. I think the problems that we've had in the past with a lot of these kinds of shows is, like you said before, one side is voicing an argument while tying a damsel to the tracks, while the other rides in on their trusty steed, presenting the other side, and you're like,
the William Tell Overture plays in the background. Our hero rides in on a horse, and $15 an hour minimum wage solves the world's problems. I use that as a very glib response. I'm not. That is, again, that's simply meant to represent how stupid those arguments are presented in certain cases.
Right, and the whole thing is, that is the writer voicing an agenda, not voicing a moral or ethical debate, which is much more interesting to me.
Infinitely, and that's what we get here, and we get. Sheldon in potentially his darkest moment going, you know what? No. I will not watch my son die. I will kill you. And how that might reflect on him in the future, assuming we get more, who knows?
Mm-hmm. I would imagine if they've got 8 other episodes of this in the can somewhere, we'll at least get what constitutes a complete season. And then they'll decide if they want to keep it.
We actually get the character of Lady Liberty, played by Leslie Bibb. who switches sides a little bit in the philosophical discussion.
Mm-hmm.
She starts by supporting the Coke.
I think in a way she's not. I don't think she's supporting her husband as much as she's patronizing him. Like I'm trying to be a good wife, and so I will stand next to you, even though I'm not entirely sure I agree with you. But at the very least, I'm willing to be your wife and be your partner in this. And then I think doesn't she actually kill the villain that kills the girl?
No, she doesn't.
She leaves him alive. Okay.
Yeah,
I couldn't tell in that scene.
There's a bit when she's walking out of it where she says we need a coroner for the hero, and then one of them says, "Well, what about Barry? What about the shithead?"
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, "Yeah, he gets to live." And it's a great moment.
I think she also has a different set of priorities than Sheldon, because Sheldon is trying to live up to an ideal and use his powers for the best good that he can. She's just trying to be a good mom. She's trying to keep this family together. She's trying to also live up to his ideals. Like she plays more of a relatable human character than I think either Sheldon or Walter.
Well, and again, by the end, after that sequence, she kind of goes, I'm not so sure what you're right anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, look at what she's been through already.
Oh, yeah.
The series starts with them having Sunday dinner, and they can't get through it because Sheldon can't get out of his own way in showing his daughter that he disapproves of her life choices. His
daughter can't, get her head out of her ass.
Well, I mean, let's stick up for Chloe for just one moment. She is an adult. She has chosen modeling as a career. And in modeling, sometimes they make you wear skimpy clothing. That's how you get paid. You don't have to take those gigs, but those are the gigs that are out there more so than not. And if you want to be successful at it, sometimes those are the gigs you have to take.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting bit of again. There is a nice little dichotomy there because him saying, you really should be wearing more clothes when they photograph you for these high-end fashion shoots that are going on magazine covers designed to sell product to either boys or young girls. You kind of roll your eyes at him.
Mm-hmm.
When she drinks her 5th bottle of wine and has very clearly snorted a couple of kilos at this point.
Yeah,
and he goes, really, you got to stop partying. You go, yeah, you're probably right there, Dad.
But that's the thing. Like he's throwing a lot at her, and some of it, I think he's on the money. Like you said, you probably shouldn't drink your body weight in alcohol and snort your weight in cocaine. Okay, I don't think that's an unreasonable request to make of your child or anyone for that matter. I often find myself, I can't say it out loud. I'll get fired, but I definitely think it. I definitely think it. Like. When I have these guys sort of lamenting expressing their great woes of their situation to me while they're in jail, and I often think, well, maybe if you'd stop shooting meth, some of this wouldn't happen. I'm just saying.
Just a thought.
Some people are like, that's awfully judgy of you. But well, it's true.
Guess what? I'm actually in a position to judge you in this case.
It's there are certain things that go along with trauma and child abuse that extend themselves to making poor life choices, and I do sympathize with that. But you also are making you overeat in the course of eating. I sympathize with you. You drink, where it's legal and it's an accepted social practice, and you indulge too much and you develop a problem. I kind of have sympathy for you. You go out of your way to shoot meth or heroin. The steps you had to take to get that far.
Yeah.
I don't feel nearly as sorry when later on you're like, oh, life's just not fair. Things are bad for me. Okay, but you shot your weight in heroin to get here. You are literally here for no other reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am not allowed to say that. That would be called antagonizing the inmate, and I'm not allowed to do that.
But Mark, I can't believe you actually go to a place that doesn't let you antagonize people.
Why do you think I have a podcast? Anyway. Hey, Alexis, your favorite movie is a movie you actually hated. You're a dick. You're right, and this is how I deal with it. True. That is an actual conversation that took place on a podcast earlier this week. Anyway.
That's true.
So when it comes to Chloe, I sympathize with she's an adult who's chosen a career path and made adult choices, and really, even as her father, at some point you gotta, if you want a relationship with your kids, you're going to have to make some allowances. The self-righteous, unwilling to, bargain's not the right word, but unflinching, uncompromising approach to judging your children never results in your children going, "You're right, I should make better life choices." It results in them rebelling 99 out of 100 times. And so in the beginning, I'm on Chloe's side. The problem is that's the first episode, and that's the last time she's going to get any kind of sympathy from me, as she proceeds to drink an Atlantic Ocean filled with champagne and vodka and snort an entire...
chuck a car at her agent.
And my other favorite one was the bad guys are getting away with what appears to be a bag full of... I mean, it looked like Crystal Blue Persuasion from fucking Breaking Bad, but I guess it was cocaine. Not really sure what it was.
It was a bag of something, and her immediate thought was, "Hey, I can snort this."
Not only can I snort this, but let me invite all my friends over so they can snort it too.
And she proceeds to overdose.
Like you do. So yeah, the rest of the time in the show, she's just a bag of shit, and I have no sympathy for her. But in that one conversation, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of on Chloe's side. Sheldon's being kind of a dick to his daughter.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, we talked a little bit about I'm trying to remember the other thing I wanted to touch on.
I know you said something in the beginning that you said comes towards the end that you want to come back round back to.
Yeah, it was something. It was stuff on the island when they're talking and they're they're trying to kind of hash out their stuff. Oh, I think I remember. There's a really nice moment when they're crossing the desert, and Sheldon at this point has mentioned, "Yeah, I see my father, and he's been trying to talk me out of this, and it's freaking me out, and I don't know what's up, but this island's here, crazy stuff's happening, so let's go." And they all kind of have this discussion, like, if you could see someone who's gone, who would it be? And Walter, just with the bald-faced lie after everyone else has shared something personal, of no one. I focus my attention forward. It's a really nice character moment, especially when it's kind of bookended by them getting their powers, and he does see his father. There's another bit where again they think that they've been locked, that they've been led to their death, and their personal issues kind of explode, and they start fighting, and eventually they realize, wait, everyone else who's ever been here has done this and killed each other. That's not the right answer. We need to come together, and it is the union that we represent. That
do you think they missed an opportunity to do something visually horrific, kind of a Guardians of the Galaxy 2 moment where you see all of the is it the dead children?
All of the failed children, yeah, just they stumble into his corpse hole.
Yeah, and you're like, oh my god, this is the secret evil that Ego's been hiding all this time. I kind of wish
they do something like that with all the different, because all of the trees in that particular area have like the groups of 5 or 6 or whatever it was. There are those groups of people dead under their roots. I'm with you in the sense that I wish they'd taken it a step further.
Yeah, I like Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is not in any way, shape, or form a horror movie, but that one scene is very graphic and very upsetting. Now, if you're going to do but you're a weenie and it wasn't like... Whatever,
no. Look, it did not affect me the same way it affected you, but it is it is a deliberately disturbing sequence.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted. I think in order to, I think they missed an opportunity to do something very visual with that, to drive the point home of, this isn't the first time aliens have tried to bestow a gift upon humanity, and humanity has utterly failed. Try to be better.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm kind of with you that I would have liked a little bit more, but it's a fairly minor complaint.
Yeah,
I think.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think the show, just in kind of summation, I think the show does a really good job of tackling a complicated issue, and then not presenting its own, agenda, and that's a rarity.
Okay, I'm going to read something to you, and I want your damn you Hollywood reaction.
All right.
The website's Rotten Tomatoes. The website's critics' consensus reads, despite some truly epic fights, Jupiter's Legacy is simply too overstuffed and slow-moving to land many narrative punches. Wow, did everyone miss the point of this show?
It sure sounds like it.
I have to now do a thought experiment here. Go ahead and make your point, but I'm gonna look at something, and I want to see if my hypothesis is right.
Okay, fair enough. So I appreciated that this show might touch on a few too many topics for its own good, perhaps. I think it might be a fair criticism, but that's a relatively small one, all things considered. I think it does a good job of balancing the past and present narratives. There's something. They do something with the aspect ratio between the past and the present.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder which of these is... That's a very deliberate choice, and put it like that. I think there's other ways if all they wanted to do was give you an indicator that we have swapped perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
It almost makes me wonder which of these is real. Which might be a really odd thing to say, but it almost feels like what's going on in the present is presented in kind of the widescreen format.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels more like you're watching a movie, and what's taking place in the past feels more like it's real.
Well, considering how much of the past was drawing from, like, King Kong and Star Wars and stuff like that, yeah, I think I would understand that deliberate choice. So my hypothesis was this, that the critics didn't understand, the critics saw a superhero show and thought they were getting XYZ, and when it didn't turn out to be that, and it's more of a sort of thoughtful examination of these various points of view as expressed through the superhero medium, they went, oh, well, this isn't what I wanted, so it's bad. And it got a 37% rotten score. And then, despite some truly epic fights, Jupiter's Legacy is too overstuffed and slow-moving to land many narrative punches. All right. So I don't think the critics really got it. But my hypothesis was, I bet they love Thunder Force, which is the superhero movie with Michelle what's-her-face. What's her name? Octavia Spencer and the one you hate all of her movies.
I hate a lot of people's movies. You're going to have to be way more specific.
She's in all the Paul Feig stuff. The heavy gal. Damn it!
Melissa McCarthy?
That's the one. If I had only gone down a little bit, I could have found the cast and crew. All right. So I'm wrong, though. The tomato meter on this one was 21%.
That is at least 20% too high.
The audience score was actually 22%, as opposed to Jupiter's Legacy, where the audience score was 72%. So the audience actually...
The audience got it, the critics didn't. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, I know. What wacky. Wacky. All right. Anything else about the show? If not, I think... I don't think this needs a second season. I think this needs to finish the first season. So let's get the back half of this. Let's get episodes 9 through 16. Let's get her done, and then I think we're done with this. Because this... I'll tell you what this felt like. This didn't feel like a television show. This felt like Falcon and the Winter Soldier or like WandaVision, where it's a multi-hour movie broken into parts. So this felt like half of a 16-hour movie broken into 1-hour segments, which I'm kind of fine with. That's, modern television can be defined in two ways. The elongated movie broken over parts, chapters in a book of a longer narrative, or the episodic television, the traditional episodic television show. And so much of what we're getting, especially in OTT, streaming services, is the former, not the latter. And I like that. I like the current long form trend of movies that we're getting. So a 16-hour Jupiter's Legacy movie, I'm kind of down with, but finish it and be done, and let's move on from this. I don't think this needs to be, a 5-season epic.
I don't know that there's enough story for that, to be quite honest. Yeah, I think kind of the last thing worth discussing is just kind of a reiteration of the central conflict. The discussion about to what degree do we, where is the appropriate happy medium between understanding what we came from and where we're going, which is a central conflict throughout the totality of human history. We didn't used to travel over those hills, now we want to travel over those hills, but you'll die because they're giant hills and there's big monsters there that we can't fight. Well, but if we stay here, then we'll just be stuck in this cave for the rest of our lives. And, well, what's wrong with the cave? Well, we do want to get out of the cave at some point, right? Like it is it's a conflict as old as humanity. And I just really love how they handled it. They gave the two opposing viewpoints rational, not only logical in this. When I say rational, I don't just mean logical. I mean it makes sense for the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Sheldon grew up kind of always seeing the bright side of things. He grew up, not knowing all about the seedy underbelly of his father's business.
Boy, is he a representation of America in the Roaring '20s, huh?
He really is, and he and Georgie, both of them. We haven't talked about George yet, and
First of all, I'm not attracted to men, but he is a handsome fella. Holy cow! Where did they dig him up, man? Because I haven't seen him in like anything else. But Jesus Christ, is he an attractive man?
Genuinely kept waiting for them to reveal him as gay.
Let's look at his. Let's see what he's done here. Well, he was a voice in Justice League: Throne of Atlantis. He's a voice in The Force Awakens.
For the record, the actor is Matt Lanter.
Yeah, Matt Lanter. Sorry. Done a lot of voice work. No wonder I've never seen him before. He's in Vampires Suck as Edward Sullen. Okay,
I think
makes sense.
the only thing that you might have seen him in, not you, but like the large you.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the 2016 movie USS Indianapolis: Men of Courage.
Okay, he's in the He's done a lot more television than he has movies. He's in Defending Jacob. He's in The Mandalorian as a New Republic soldier, Devon. He's in Timeless as Wyatt Logan. He's the voice of Anakin in Rebels.
He's the voice of Anakin in pretty much all the animated stuff.
He's on CSI Cyber, The Astronaut Wives Club for 3 episodes, Star-Crossed. Yeah, so he's a working television actor. He does a lot of voice role.
He did a really good job in this show. I mean, he's, apart from Josh Duhamel, he's probably my standout for the show.
He does a very good job of acting the time they're portraying him in. Because sometimes,
100%.
like if you've ever watched, oh gosh, now I've lost the name of the show. It followed The Wire in terms of like, and so The Sopranos in terms of crime shows on HBO. But it was done in the time of Prohibition. Has what's his face from?
Thinking of Boardwalk Empire.
That's the one. So
and
like,
for the record, it stars Steve Buscemi.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to. So the funny thing about Boardwalk Empire is some of those characters very much acted like characters in the time that they're in, whether that's how they really talked back then or it's a dramatic representation of, you're never going to get me, coppa. Like some people actually like talk that way in the show and some people don't. And it was kind of fun to see that here because, again, you have some people like Josh Duhamel it acts wonderfully in this, and I really did want to say there's nobody. I may not have liked the characters, but nobody gives a bad performance. Everyone is doing the job they have been asked to do in this show, and some of them are doing it better than others. But nobody does a bad job. Go ahead.
I said I agree.
Oh, okay. I thought you were I thought you were starting to disagree, and then I'm like, okay, well, go ahead.
No.
I didn't know what you were going to say.
Complete agreement. Keep going.
But like Josh Duhamel, his dialogue readings in the past could have been in any time in history or the present, and it wouldn't have changed a thing. Matt Lanter's line readings are very much of the "You're never going to get me, copper." He is very much 1920s man.
Yeah, I think the other guy who does a good job with that is the guy who plays Walter. When he's in the past, he doesn't have this a cadence difference to his voice, but he has a vernacular difference.
Yeah, very much so. I very much believe they were men of that time, whereas Josh Duhamel was Josh Duhamel, set in that time, if you see what I'm saying. Even Leslie Bibb, I thought, when they had her as a reporter, they did a good job of, she's a liberated woman of the 1930s working in a male-dominated field as a reporter, but they didn't make her overly shrill or bitchy or,
in fact, the one sequence where she does kind of go off on the newspaper, it's entirely justified.
Well, yeah, she's being sacked, for one thing. And then later on, when they're all ready to tear each other's throats out, and she's like, "Stop!" It's entirely justified given what's happening in that very moment.
Yeah.
And I really do applaud, because there is a tendency, even in our current woke Hollywood environment, boy, is there a tendency to write women as just awful. And they restrain themselves here.
To the benefit of the entire show, yes.
Yeah.
What the last thing was.
That's going to kind of serve as my final point. Was both. I thought the show looks okay. Because of the costumes and whatever, it's got some fun color schemes to it. But other than that, it kind of just looks like a television show. Nothing good, bad, or indifferent about it. It's I have nothing to complain about. I have nothing to rave about, but it's an element of the craft, so I'm bringing it up.
To their stuff in the past, very briefly, the costuming they do for the stuff in the past is excellent. I'm with you. Josh Duhamel's line reading is his line reading, but boy, does that man look every bit of 1920s America.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you in that I kind of wish the first season had just been in the 1930s.
Again, I find that is much more to my personal taste. We have a nice blend of insanity, horror, mystery, adventure. Some of this. I'm down for that. That is my jam.
As opposed to the modern stuff which delves into CW melodrama, which I know you love.
Yeah, love.
It's a sexy CW show on Netflix. Anyway. That's it. That's going to serve as my final point on this. Interesting, colorful costumes, a nice play on the medium, good to excellent acting. I enjoyed the themes. It's a little uneven. It's a little slow at times, and I kind of wish they hadn't ended it the way they did. But stay tuned for the next 8 episodes, I guess. And that's it. So I'm going to now shut up and let you finish a point.
I largely agree with you. It's one of the better examples of not just this centralized argument about I'm going to use terms that have a political connotation, understand that I do not mean them in their political sense.
Are you going to go into an argument how it's okay to kill the submitting man with a shield again?
He wasn't submitting. He was... Never mind. I did get deep into that. When we talked about that, because you, imperial dictator, supreme potentate Radulich said, "Sir, I will not have a discussion about police violence here."
There were 5 of us. It was a 3-hour podcast, and we wasted a lot of it on chain of custody on the Shield. No, I was not.
You decided the chain of custody thing was a worthy discussion.
I did, because I'm an idiot and an asshole, but that's besides the point. I did not feel, given the panel we had at the time and the length of time it took to discuss that series, a discussion of whether or not he should have murdered the guy with the shield was appropriate at the time. You're correct. I shut you down out of necessity.
And fair enough. The terms I'm going to use here are progressivism and conservatism. Now, again, I do not mean these as they relate to political parties.
That was the name of my blog.
Yes, it was, because much like your blog, you know what? No, I'm not going to say it. That's too mean. But again, we have one group that is saying, forward, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. Another group saying, there's torpedoes in the water, how about we just never get in the boat? And again, I'm exaggerating that because, especially in contemporary society, all we deal with seems to be extremes when it comes to talking points.
It's funny you're bringing this up because this came up. I guess you heard the podcast. I kind of brought up a similar thing on the book about the non-policy related, more thematic definitions of progressivism and conservatism.
Yeah, in a contemporary sense, again, the way those terms have been co-opted by political parties who use them to simply entrench their own power, and that is not me saying one nice thing about either political party, whatever your particular persuasion happens to be. I'm not going into it. That's an entirely different talking point. Point being, both the major parties suck. They are corrupt on a I hate to say systemic. There are serious problems of leadership, and they are all entrenched power brokers, and I find that distasteful at a bare minimum. But progressivism and conservatism are not code words for they're not code words for Marxism or fascism, right? Mm-hmm. We think about them in this way because we are badly taught about how the political line works, the political spectrum. And again, both parties have at this particular point decided to co-opt them into different things. Progress is a social necessity. We progress. It has led to some great things. It has led to many horrible things. The converse being, how about we take a minute and think? Or again, in the extreme, how about we just not do that? What do you mean we have to free the slaves? Like, no, guys, slavery's bad.
I was thinking about like the aftermath of 9/11. You know, there was unity in Congress for like 5 minutes, and out of that unity came a couple of things. One, a declaration of war in Afghanistan, because that's where the terrorists were, and the Patriot Act.
Yeah. So again, the larger point being, the discussion around these two things is they are not movements. They are simply terms we have given them to try and express large-scale human behavior that has manifested itself over our history. And that constant push and pull is a real debate. It is an ongoing debate. There are two things that are historically proven here when it comes to this. Progress for progress's sake ends badly. If you do not properly consider, again, if all you do is, but this is new, a lot of new stuff is bad for you. By the same token, if you stifle yourself, you atrophy. So again, that push and pull is a push and pull, and how it affects things. I referenced the Civil War very briefly. Believe it or not, in the 1860s. The Republicans were, in fact, the progressive party, while the Democrats were the conservative ones. And those positions, as far as how they choose to leverage generalized social movements for political gain, for personal and political gain, has changed over time because of any number of reasons. In fact, a great number of reasons, not just any number, but a huge number. But it's rare these days that you get those two phenomena in particular addressed respectfully and fairly in the same property. I'm not even saying you should watch this to understand, that particular debate. It's not the great magnum opus on progressivism versus conservatism. It's just not. But it is a great example of how to write two opposing viewpoints for media consumption in the best way possible. And I think it deserves a tremendous amount of credit for that. Again, the Utopian is not he's not a comical character. He's struggling with what he's dealing with. Because he knows, when he brings up, I don't think we should kill villains because if we become judge, jury, and executioner of everyone, I think one of the things he says is, guys, seriously, what about due process? Like, that's a real thing. That's a thing you should get you out there listening. If you wind up on the wrong side of stuff, you want every single ounce of due process coming to you.
We see it every day. I'm not somebody who thinks that every person that gets arrested is guilty, and certainly everyone that comes into the jail certainly seems to think they're not guilty. The large majority of them. But I am all for... I think due process is one of the most important elements of the United States of America.
Absolutely.
The amount of... it comes up a lot, where people... They get arrested, and because they don't really understand the nuance of the law, are like, I thought you were innocent until proven guilty. Yeah, that is absolutely true, but you can be charged. There's a difference between being charged and convicted. So you can be charged and brought in for custody on any number of charges. Whether or not you can get them to stick, whether or not you can prove guilt, is a whole other kettle of fish. And I think that's where people who get arrested tend to tend to lose sight of how things work, because they're like the cop arresting you isn't a lawyer or a judge. They are enforcers of the law. They are not interpreters of the law. They are not people who enact the law. They are a tool of the law. So a judge says, this person is found guilty of XYZ. Go get them. That's it. That's what the cops do.
If you happen to break the law in broad daylight,
yeah,
you decided to get into a fist fight in the middle of the street, they're probably going to arrest them. There's some confusion about what law you broke here, buddy. Mm-hmm. Now, again, that doesn't mean you're guilty. There might certainly be extenuating circumstances beyond the knowledge of the arresting officer.
Right. This is why we have things like the OJ trial, where where he did he murder Cole Brown Simpson and whoever the other person was? Probably, but they had their opportunity in court to prove that he did or didn't do it. That is how this works. He was arrested because suspicion of which, but you still have to prove it after the fact. You can't just be like, I charge, this isn't the Salem witch trial, because there's your choice. You can either have due process, and sometimes it allows, somebody who really did break the law to go free because you can't prove it for whatever the reasons are, or you have the Salem witch trials, in which case we're all pointing at each other and then we all die.
We must open up the floor to wild accusations. Woo! I choose Goody Flanders. You're entirely correct, and I like that. And I think there's a singular point that they don't address that I think is maybe a better one. It's a hole that I want to know their justification for the world. His point is, we're supposed to be better, and we are not the supreme moral arbiters. And we cannot and should not remove from go around all of these things that are objective goods for the sake of our own laziness or expediency, which is a true thing. I don't get to steal from you simply because it's easier for me to steal from you than to earn something. The only counter argument that I want to know is, okay, I'm all for this. Makes sense, right? Like I can understand where he's coming from. Is there some reason that these people are not executed? I mean this in all sincerity.
You know, it's the.
And
I mean,
again,
what you're asking about the death penalty.
Yeah.
You know, and from state to state, that's debated. There are just some states where, by and large, the people who get to make those decisions, who are elected officials, have decided it's immoral to kill people under any circumstances. And then there's Texas, who put in a drive-through.
Oh, forget it. Texas did not put in a drive-through. Hey, look,
No, that's a Ron White joke, though, and I think it's very funny.
I mean, to be fair, until recently, one of the options that you had in Utah for the death penalty was the firing squad.
I'll tell you what.
That might actually still be an option now that I think about it. I'd have to double check.
I'll tell you what, though. For states that have it, it is incredibly hard to actually get somebody killed under the death penalty. It takes years.
I think my objection to the death penalty is not a moral one in the sense that I think there are people who have done such evil and heinous things that it is almost the society is almost beholden, or it behooves the society to remove them permanently.
So let me ask you a philosophical question, and we really need to end with this, okay? But it's something that my dad has brought up to me before. Now, we all, if you've listened to this podcast and I've brought up my dad before, you know that he tends to be pretty far to the left these days, at least.
I am genuinely curious how your father and I are so different in so many ways, yet for some reason you occasionally go, "That's why I like you. You remind me of my dad." Because I'm a surly old man at heart.
I mean, your personalities are very similar. Your beliefs are different, but who cares?
Fair enough.
So my dad brings this up a lot. And here's the thing. There have been people who have been sentenced to death, people whose death sentence have been carried out, who they found out years later through new evidence did not actually commit that crime. How many of those are you willing to accept before you say, how many innocent people are we willing to execute before we reach the conclusion that the death penalty, because proof of guilt can be undone by new evidence, and there really is no such thing as a shadow of a doubt in most cases, before you say the death penalty is cruel and unusual?
My issue with the death penalty as it currently stands is purely the execution. I don't mean the execution of the person, I mean the implementation of the system.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, for one thing, you're entirely correct. It is known that innocent people have been executed by the state.
Right, and I think that's where my dad has always stood, where I'm not willing to accept any of these, so therefore you cannot have the death penalty.
And I don't think that is an unreasonable stance. Maybe I'm going to disagree with it,
mm-hmm.
but I don't think it's unreasonable, for the most part. I think you would need a couple of things when it comes to implementing the death penalty. One, you do need a higher standard of proof, by which I mean the following. If someone is convicted and sentenced to death, I think it then behooves the state, if it's going to take upon itself this burden, to go further into proving that this is that this is necessary. One, it should be reserved for the most heinous and depraved crimes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's the famous story about Scott Glenn, the actor, who, when he was researching his Full and Silence of the Lambs, actually, he shadowed the guy who had that job, that real job at Quantico, and he was privy to some of there were, I forget the names of these gentlemen, but they were fairly notorious for. There were two of them. They abducted, raped, and murdered a bunch of young women, and recorded themselves doing it. And he observed the recordings, and he said, he's been very public. That experience changed my stance on the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm perfectly willing to accept that we need a higher standard of proof, and I absolutely mean that. Like, you can be convicted. All you need to be is beyond a reasonable doubt to be convicted. If you're going to kill someone, I think there needs to be a higher standard. 100%. I also think it needs to happen quicker. You're entirely correct. There are some people who are on death row for 30 years. That's ridiculous.
The appeals process is a real thing. You talk about.
I know, and I'm all for due process. I think if we're talking just about the process by which the state is going to kill someone, we would need a different. And I don't know exactly what this would be. I genuinely don't. But I think we would need a different process for. Again, you need a higher standard of proof. You would need a.
I think what you're talking about is kind of a not a separate trial per se, but an addendum to the trial where you're asking for the death penalty, and it can't just be a lone judge's purview under state law or federal law, as the case may be. I think it needs to be a burden of proof situation where now you are, and I think in some cases this does happen under certain sentencing where you argue, there's sentencing on the table. Sentencing options, and the two lawyers sort of argue in front of a judge as to what the sentence should be, higher or lower, that sort of thing. And maybe that's the kind of thing you need for the death penalty, where if it's a death penalty potential case and you have a lawyer who says, we are moving for the death penalty, you then have to have an addendum to the trial to prove that this is appropriate in this particular case.
You would almost need two separate trials at that point, and I know that would be a bigger logistical burden. But you would need one to determine guilt or innocence, entirely absent of whether or not this person is going to die. And then you follow that with, okay, congratulations, prosecutor, you got your conviction. Now you have to present your concrete proof that this person deserved, and that there is no. That there is no countermanding evidence, whatever that happens to be. And again, I don't know what the system would be. I am under the current implementation of the death penalty. There's entirely too many problems for my personal taste. Maybe that's just the way my brain works, not being happy with it. But at the same time, I firmly believe that there are such heinous and depraved people out there in the world. And I mean, I don't even believe that. I know that. That is incontestably true.
I go to work every day and I see it. You're not incorrect.
That, it is somewhat on the burden of the society, of the state, to completely remove these people. And for anyone that might potentially be asking me, but, sir, aren't you LDS and don't you believe in the redemptive power of Christ's atonement? Yes, I do.
There are some sick people out there that cannot be redeemed. There's no medicine. There's no therapy. They are broken into and shattered into too many pieces, and all the king's horses and all the king's men are not putting them back together again. And that might be too cynical for some. I know I follow a lot of prison rights people on Twitter and whatnot, and I've kind of gotten into some very polite conversations about this with them. I'm not even joking about that.
No, I've seen some of them, and you are correct. You are one of the few people who's able to have polite conversations on Twitter. I applaud you.
Thanks. I try hard, and I've said look, this doesn't have to be zero sum. You can have services, and you can have diversion programs out there, and I believe in these things, and I really do believe that substance abuse is a mental illness and that people need treatment, not incarceration. But that doesn't apply 100% across the board for every situation. Some people with, an antisocial personality disorder who have committed over-the-top heinous crimes, what are you going to, other than, there's medicating somebody to correct a chemical imbalance, and then there's just drugging them. And if you're drugging them, Jesus Christ, why don't you kill them then? That's a quality of life. And maybe that's a philosophical question that I'm throwing out there. But,
a little bit.
If man cannot have quality of life and they're not redeemable, and punishment doesn't really have an effect on them because they're so antisocial, and I mean that in the clinical sense, then I'm not entirely sure what the point of keeping them alive anymore is. It's like if you're dealing with a person who you're never going to reach in any kind of way, and will never acknowledge their role in the crime they committed, I'm not entirely sure then what is the point other than the inherent humanity of not killing anyone.
Well, and just for the record, to get to the end of my point about the power of the redemption, yes, Christ's atonement could in fact reach what we consider to be the most depraved individuals. I'm also a firm believer, and this goes to my religious belief sensibilities, that your progression does not stop when you die. So whatever goes on beyond the veil, those people can still potentially be taught and can still potentially change their eternal outcome in that respect.
You are welcome to have that belief, and I applaud you for having it.
Hey, look, not everyone's going to take. I am not one of those everyone is going to be saved. No, many are called, few are chosen, and the path is narrow. That's true, but there's, again, like you said, there's also some people that are so damaged in this life. Maybe the only chance they have is in the next.
Well, you did say that is a matter of belief, and to which I have no counter argument, because now we're into belief and not practice or fact, and I can't speak to something I have no personal knowledge of, nor do I have a reflective faith of. I simply do not know. You talk about personal belief. Boy, are we off fucking track, by the way.
Well, again, we brought it up because it's a somewhat relevant point to the discussion about the show. Josh Duhamel, the Utopian, doesn't want to kill people outright because he doesn't want to be a dictator. He's worried about what comes after him, and he sees the objective good in the due process afforded to...
Yes.
In due process. So my question, and the show doesn't answer this. I'm not asking you to interpret for the show.
Okay.
The show literally does not answer this. Why are some of these heinous supervillains not executed? And again, I don't know. The show never goes into it. Maybe it's because the only way to kill some of these people, given their superpowered nature, would be to have Josh Duhamel's character laser eye them. And he's not comfortable doing that for any number of personal reasons.
Isn't that kind of the Batman thing with Joker? The Joker's killed like 500,000 people in Gotham, and Batman's allowed it to happen because of the singular belief that killing people is wrong, even the Joker. And so we allow the Joker to exist and hurt people on an ongoing basis because this ideal is more important than any individual or mass amount of lives.
There's a couple of things that I want to kind of... If we're going to discuss the Batman paradox as far as that goes. Briefly. One, I tend to consider Batman a bit of a moral coward in that respect. Two, his decision on this is entirely selfish. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. Selfish is just putting the self first. Sometimes that is the healthiest thing to do. He knows himself well enough to know that if I killed even this guy, I would go full Punisher. Like I can't, Batman, Bruce Wayne, cannot afford to cross this line because I do not believe I could ever come back. And that is a great character wrinkle for Bruce Wayne and Batman. It is a wonderful thing to explore. Not knocking it. The Joker's continued existence is a greater damnation on the penal system where, well, he's not competent and we don't kill the crazies. Like, no, he's escaped Arkham willy-nilly. He's like, it's one thing for Batman to go, I personally cannot do this. I can kind of respect that on the one hand. At least I can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
For the totality of the rest of that system to look at this guy come back into Arkham every 6 to 8 months or whatever and just go, yeah, lock him back up, we'll do more of what we can for security. Some guard just shoot this guy in the head.
What I always found funny about the whole Batman Joker thing was in the narratives, we are talking about fictional characters here, but it is always sort of a ongoing thing in Batman that there's always somebody working at Arkham who thinks they can get through to the Joker. And I just feel like in real life, no psychiatrist, no psychologist, no social worker, no mental health counselor, nobody would believe they could get through to the Joker. I mean antisocial personality is a thing.
You say that, Mark, but there are some very stupid people out there.
I mean, look, I'm saying people who work and study the mental health profession, from the doctors to the social workers to the counselors, study antisocial personality. They study personality disorders. They've read the sociopath next door. And then you take that knowledge and you look at the Joker, who not only is all of those things, but is also a mass murderer. I could absolutely see some, tree-hugging liberal panty waist saying, but no, the Joker, we can get through to him. He's just, he just had a bad childhood. Nobody who actually works in this field for any great length of time is thinking that. They're like, no. Hit this fucker with enough Haldol to drop a horse.
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that is a narrative flaw, that there's always someone who thinks they can get through to this monster, despite mountains of evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, nobody working in this field thinks that would think that you could get through to the Joker, but they always write characters like that. I mean, that's Harley Quinn's thing, right? Not only did she think she could get through to the Joker, but she fell in love with him. I mean, look, there are people who fall in love with prisoners all the time. That is one of the the many flavors of crazy in the human condition. So, Harley Quinn falling in love with the Joker is more believable than any mental health professional on Earth thinking they could cure the Joker.
Yeah,
without a lobotomy, that is.
Again, the kind of long and the short there is, I would love to know the answer to that question: why the supervillains are not executed.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a kind of a hole in the world building, and maybe they're going to address it in the next bit. Again, it's something I would like to know.
Okay. All right, folks.
That's kind of it. I mostly enjoyed the show. It drags a little in the middle, and again, all the stuff with the vast majority of the stuff with Chloe is just turn me into a zombie and let me tear the Miz's other ACL.
So, that said, you are going to be on the next edition of the Metal Hammer of Doom. Because you want to just talk about, and we're going to call it by its band name. If you want to call it by its artist name, that's fine. But I much prefer the band name Galactic Kraken.
Which is for the record, it is a great name.
That is a fantastic name. I'm looking at AmazonMusic.com as we speak. Which if you click our link in the description,
I assume you clicked our link to look at it.
I did.
Nice.
Get AmazonMusic.com/W2M Network, and you can find Galactic Kraken, Starship Velociraptor, and you can start streaming right now with your free 30 days on us. You could stream Best Band in the Universe featuring Ninja Brian. Settle It with a Sword Fight, Army of Tigers, Man the Cannons, 10,000 Light Years. I mean, all of these great songs put out by this fabulous band, Galactic Kraken. Tell me about Galactic Kraken on AmazonMusic.com.
Well, for the record, Galactic Kraken is not a band, it's one guy. It is a musician by the name of Jonathan Young, who achieved a degree of fandom on YouTube for doing metal covers of either pop songs or anime openings, or most famously would be his some of his English anime openings and his rock covers of Disney songs, which are great. For the record, he's got a couple of albums that are those. He's got one that's a collection of all of the villain covers he's done from not just Disney but other animated studios. And again, if you've got a taste for those kinds of things, and I certainly do, it's a lot of fun. But like a lot of people who get famous for reinterpretation work, the creative outlet is not really satisfied. And most musicians are the creative types. So he decided to put some effort into creating this particular album, and it is a rollicking, genre-bending, wild good time. And as Mark mentioned, we will have a full review of that on the Metal Hammer of Doom. So please click our link, listen to it, then you'll know what we're talking about when we talk about it on Tuesday.
Absolutely. All right. So that's it. That's our wrap up here of Jupiter's Legacy and a much longer conversation about life, the universe, and everything in the law.
Hey, you know what? That's to the credit of the show that it's able to kind of engender those kinds of discussions.
Well, Robert, I like you, and you're my friend, and I enjoy these sort of protracted conversations about anything from murdering a man with a shield to chain of custody of a shield to the nature of the death penalty and how it should be executed, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact that we start with some silly Netflix show and we land on maybe they should just kill the Joker, I think is a testament to our art of the conversation that you and I engage in.
For the record, there is no debate about that as far as there is no debate about that as far as the Batman universe goes. At this point, they should just kill the Joker.
Terrific. All right, so starting with Sunday, we kicked off the week with our re-airing of Daredevil Season 2 review. Eventually, when Jesse decides to get off his lazy butt, I tease. We had the initial review of Daredevil was done in 4 parts, and I said, I'm not doing that. So I told Jesse, get on the stick and edit those together into a listenable 1 episode. And he said, you're not the boss of me, you're not my mom. And I went, just fucking do it already. And he said, I'll get to it eventually. So eventually...
It's on the list.
Yeah. So eventually, we will get Daredevil Season 1 uploaded. But in the meantime, you can listen to Daredevil Season 2, which was done in a tight 1 episode.
Yeah, and the first 4 episodes of Daredevil Season 2 are almost a perfect little self-contained arc of television and narrative goodness.
And then Elektra. Goddamn Elektra.
Yeah.
Christine and I reviewed, as I said before, the first volume of Jupiter's Legacy, of which the show was in part based on. Myself, Jason Teasley, Alexis Hana, and the aforementioned Robert Winfree reviewed Spiral and a little bit of Top Gun, because we got bored with Spiral.
Spiral is a fairly boring movie. And your first experience with Top Gun, expecting a rollicking, Michael Bay-esque action flick about fighter pilots in the Cold War, to the crashing with the reality of a melodramatic character piece rife with homoerotic undertones, was just the best thing. You must have been the saddest of all pandas walking out of that theater.
I was definitely thinking, if I hear "Take My Breath Away" one more fucking time, I'm punching a baby in the throat. Speaking of punching babies in the throat, Jesse dropped an Unspoken Issues.
Those are not related at all.
Him and Dean Compton, once they peeled Dean Compton off the fucking ceiling, discussed X-Men Volume 2, number 11. And then myself and Jesse reviewed Every 20 Years by Saliva and then played a bunch of their singles, which was fun. We had a good time with that. Earlier today, Harry Broadhurst from The Kickoff and the reaction that he does with Tony Acero from 401 Mania, where these poor bastards watch every Raw and every SmackDown, and then they talk about it, which I assume is group therapy.
They have not invited me to their group therapy sessions. I assume I'm just not invited. I'm unwanted.
I'll let Harry know.
No. Okay, look, I joke, but I seriously, it's fine one way or the other. Like they've got a good thing going over there. They don't need a third voice. That we're fine.
Well,
I just happen to I cover SmackDown. I occasionally cover Raw. Wait, so the Raws that Tony doesn't cover, he watches. He goes back and watches to.
I cannot speak. I was going to say I cannot speak to the specificity of what goes on their reaction podcast. I just know it does.
That's poor man. If you occasionally you are blessed by the gods to be stuck in an airport or on an airplane as that show is airing, and the good people at 411 will find someone else to cover it for you, usually me. And you then throw that's getting stopped from walking off of a pit and then going, it looks like fun.
Well, Harry joined myself and Chris Bailey to discuss Impact Under Siege, and then Chris Bailey had to go back to work, so he tagged in the other podsman, Chris Sheehan, who hung out with me and Harry, and we discussed WrestleMania Backlash. Tomorrow...
I assume you had positive things to say about the best thing in professional wrestling, Roman Reigns.
Yes. No joke, we very much gushed over that match. And Cesaro.
Great. Poor Cesaro, man. I can't believe they're shunting him back down to get lost in the shuffle with Seth Rollins.
Oh, I can, and you should hear the podcast of me explain why.
Oh, hold on. Let me rephrase. I know why. Vince hates him. Vince looks at Cesaro and goes, you can't be that strong without having bigger muscles and being on the gear. How dare you challenge my perception of reality?
So we have a loaded... For those that are like, maybe they should put out less shows, you're kind of drowning out the content. Well, tomorrow we're going to hit you with 4. How's that sound?
One of which will feature me, again.
A couple will feature you, as a matter of fact. We have a re-airing of our Damn You Hollywood review of Batman v Superman when that was out in theaters. Myself and Alexis Haina will be reviewing MODOK Assassin to go along with the release of MODOK on Hulu. Robert Winfree and I will be discussing Army of the Dead by Zack Snyder. I will then leave my house for the first time in 2 days and go take my kids to go see Fast and Furious in the theaters as we work our way through that franchise leading up to F9. And then I'm going to come home just in time.
2 of the worst. You didn't take them to see Too Fast, Too Furious, which might be one of the worst movies ever made.
It wasn't in theaters in January, that's why.
But Tokyo Drift followed by Fast and Furious is one of the worst 1-2 punches that franchise has put together. They're awful.
I'll have to see what my son thinks. I will be
Your son will give it 3.5 stars and go, yay! Whee! I'm going to be a train.
I hope so. Take 3.
Your daughter will go, but why is Paul Walker in a romantic relationship with Dom's sister? That makes me uncomfortable. Also, why is there a big bus crash at the end? What's the cliffhanger?
In what movie do they kill Michelle Rodriguez temporarily?
Oh,
because that's what I'm expecting her to react big to, is the killing of a woman in one of these movies.
It might. It's not this one, is it? It might be, actually.
Yeah. All right.
Hang on. It might be this one because I think it's in. Yeah, because it's in 5 when he meets. She's The Rock's partner at the beginning, but it's Chris Hemsworth's wife in real life. So it actually is in this one, and then in 2 movies they're gonna kill. They're gonna kill Wonder Woman. They kill Gal Gadot's character.
Mm-hmm. When I come home from that, Jason and I will be getting together. We'll be discussing Zombies 1, Zombies 2, and then the newly dropped that day, Aquarium of the Dead, marking the 3rd part of the Zombies trilogy. On Saturday, we're
Why
back
do you do that to yourself?
On Saturday, we're going to be going back into the archives. Pat Mullen joined A Long Road to Ruin to talk the Chuck Norris trilogy, Missing in Action. That was a fun show. You'll get to hear it on Saturday. Robert Winfree is threatening to cover Jose Ramirez versus Josh Taylor on ESPN, which is a title unification fight. So if UFC ends...
Assuming the UFC event ends at the appropriate... I'm not threatening you with anything. Hold on. You said, hey, this should line up, and I said, sure.
So if the UFC does, in fact, end on time, we'll be covering that fight. And then on Sunday, we are re-airing Luke Cage Season 1, and then both of those shows will be up on the feed. And Mark, in the evening...
Hear Mark say the N-word more times than he probably should. Followed by me complaining about too many concerts, which is a terrible flaw of that season of television.
And then, speaking of terrible television, myself and Sean Comer will review the first season of Shadow and Bone. All right, I'm done. My tongue hurts. I want to go to bed. Do your plugs. Let's go.
Well, you did forget to mention our upcoming review of Castlevania Season 4.
That's all next week's stuff. I don't want to get into it right now. Fine.
You got it. Hang on. Well, I will plug that next week. Mark and I will be reviewing Castlevania Season 4. so far, it's certainly an improvement over season 3, which he and I both we took out back. We made it dig its own grave. You can find our review of that in the archives if you're interested. We did not have nice things to say about that season of television. 4 thus far has been a vast improvement over that. Not all the way finished with it yet. You can also find me hosting the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast on Sundays. This last week we reviewed UFC UFC's 262 and previewed the upcoming UFC on ESPN Plus 46. I wish to confirm that. Give me just a second. Yes. So we previewed that. We did a review of the pay-per-view event. It's a good time. This week we'll be reviewing the UFC on ESPN Plus 46 card and previewing, I believe it's UFC on ESPN Plus 47. Yes, it is. That is not a good card. That is, oh God. They're main eventing it with Jairzinho Rosenstruik and Augusto Sakai. Your co-main event is Walt Harris and Marcin Tybura. Why do you do this to me? What did I do? And I don't want some generalized answer like you know what you did. No. You pick a specific thing that I did to suffer for this, and we can mark it off the list. We'll preview the whole stupid thing on Sunday. I cover professional wrestling for 411 Mania on occasion. Whatever AEW Dark Elevation happens to put out on Monday. This last week was a 2.5-hour episode. And for some reason, people don't understand how my saying that this show should not be 2.5 hours is a constant, is just nothing but me complaining. Well, I'm here to critique the good, the bad, and the ugly. And when that show is 90 minutes, give or take, it's pretty dark. It's a pretty effective block of professional wrestling. But the AEW equivalent of Sunday Night Heat should not take up more total wrestling content time than Monday Night Raw. Just a thought. So you can find my review of that. And to be clear, there was some good on that episode. It really was. I certainly tried to be fair. My review of the latest MLW Underground re-air from Wednesday, which half or so of that particular episode is the War Games match from like 2003 between the Extreme Horsemen and the Funkin' Army, which I'd already seen because they aired it as part of the Extreme Horsemen anthology series when they were releasing those during the pandemic. It got worse on rewatch. So you can find my review of that for whatever that's worth. And Friday I covered WWE SmackDown. So all of that is in the Wrestling Zone of 411 Mania. Please do come by, say hello if you're so inclined. I'd appreciate it. I contribute to the revamped wrestling, the 4 Rs. I do the SmackDown segment of that and have a pretty good time doing it. So when that goes up every week, you can find my contributions. Let's see, was there anything else? Just the stuff that we have coming up. So tomorrow, Mark and I are talking Army of the Dead. We'll see what Zack Snyder can do returning to the zombie genre, and with Dave Bautista in a lead role. That'll be something.
All right, folks, thanks for joining us on this extended conversation about Jupiter's Legacy. For Robert Winfree, I'm Mark Radulich. Be well, be safe, and behave.